Chapter 3. Marion. Separating the two states of Arison, a barrier emitting from the planet's core spread out along the border, dividing the planet in half. It wasn't constructed by the Peps. That technology was well beyond their means. The Okeanos wouldn't have bothered with such an elaborate device. The 5-metre-high coral wall that grew up the invisible barrier would have been enough. They would have had no desire to swim into Selena where the Peps were. The truth was, no one knew who built it, and very few gave it any mind. It appeared in the earliest recordings of history with no clues to its maker, and was simply referred to as the barrier. Only 3 structures breached it, continuously occupying both states of Arison. There was the border post in the desert region, and another here in Jamesvarg, and a busy transit hub. The transit hub was so busy in fact that it never slept. Whilst most of Jamesvarg was still asleep in the dark of night, it was active with light traffic. It had evolved over the years, and like the barrier, had been in existence longer than recorded history. The central hub was split by the barrier and lay across the border wall that ran north and south through the city. Unlike the tiny border post, the transit hub was massive. The border post was staffed only by Okeanos. The transit hub was different in that regard, and it was staffed by both Okeanos and Peps. The Peps worked in the half that lay in the state of Selena and controlled transport there. The Okeanos worked in the half that lay on their side and controlled transport in their state of Sopio. The transit hub took care of the many goods that required exchange between the two states. It was one of a kind in that both Peps and Okeanos worked within it. The structure itself was organic and very much alive. It was controlled largely by the Okeanos, but it had conscious thought. There was nowhere within the internal structure that Peps and Okeanos could come into contact due to the segregation, but for a creature to be user-friendly to both Okeanos and Peps was odd. The many twisted branches interwove in a haphazard manner, like tree roots twisting away from the central trunk. Large caverns cratered between the sandy bottom, and the branches curving down from above were permanently lit green from bacteria growing in the shadows. The entrances to the structure were hidden in the twisted junctions of the branches, and small and large vessels disappeared and reappeared at irregular places, moving the goods and occupants of Arison rapidly around their planet. The Okeanos also monitored space around Arison, and the only way to get there legally was in an Okeanos craft. Since the Deutschland affair, Peps had been banned from leaving Arison. Not that this mattered, as the general Pep population cared for nothing beyond the immediate space around Arison anyway. If you intended to leave Arison, you had to be on Okeanos and enter the transit hub from the Okeanos-controlled side in Sopio. The only way into Sopio from Selena was half an hour away at the border post in Frigid Square. Frigid Square was alive. Mostly. Nearly all the 100-odd crowd of Peps were whistling, chirping, and clicking as loud as they could. All but 36 of them were shimmering brightly red from their flanks. The border post looked on in silence. No matter how insistently the Peps hammered on its windows, the gates into Sopio remained shut. The crowd could not be heard across the border. The only indication that something was wrong was a red flashing light and some blank displays in the Okeanos Duty Board Ensign Security Office within the Academy of Military Might, several blocks away. The Okeanos Duty Board Ensign couldn't believe what he was seeing. The alarm in his guard room back at the Academy had started flashing, and his security images had gone bizarrely blank. His job was to monitor the Jamesvarg border post from his security office, full 15-minute swim away. For the first time in memory, his display showing the border post were not working. He'd brought his aqua scooter to work today, and he made the 15-minute journey in 7. He would have been quicker but for a crazy swimmer who shot out in front of him. The shocked border post had apologised profusely as he braked hard to a stop. The swimmer had darted away without a pleasant word to spare. How rude. By the green glow of Arison's bacteria, the ensign approached the border post. There was an unpleasant odour in the current. It made him gag. His hearts were racing, but they dropped down a gear and quickened when it became obvious the stench was coming from the border post. He had hunted and killed big game. The putrid smell on the current was not unlike that. He didn't bring his scooter to a complete stop before dismounting, and it continued in an ever-decreasing arc as he entered cautiously into the border post. His heart sank and stopped for a beat or three. He turned and stumbled out. He vomited his breakfast. One of the small squid he had swallowed whole darted away. He didn't notice it. His mind was as empty as the monitors back at the academy. The back of his retinas were burnt with the image of the 3 dead duty sailors. Nothing else registered. It took the better part of a minute before his mind would release him and he could start functioning again. He turned back toward the building's interior, took a couple of deep draughts of fluid to oxygenate his blood, and swam in. He didn't look at his dead comrades. He started numbly running his hands over the command station to call his guard commander. He didn't notice the extra steps required to achieve this until the image of an angry snout came into view, demanding why the border post was offline. The ensign hadn't even noticed the post's inactivity. He didn't try explaining it. He just pointed at one of the dead sailors. The silence that met his response was answer enough for him. He turned in a trance back to the command station and moved his webbed hands over it. Slowly, the border post came back online. The image in the academy returned and displayed the ghastly scene to the ensign's empty office. The border post window was filled with angry peps, hammering, demanding to be let through. The volume of chirping, clicking and whistling must have been piercing. He noticed the gate had been activated and the energy cannon had been fired multiple times. He found the surveillance data and started the playback. It showed Nakina swing for his life out of an alley into the square. Bolts of energy could be seen hitting the walls of the alley just behind the fleeing victim. Then a group of 4 peps emerged from the alley and charged into the square with their weapons firing. The surveillance footage suddenly ended and was replaced with static. He rewound the footage to see if perhaps weapons fire had hit the camera, but it had not. The ensign would have to find that poor fleeing Aquinas. He's probably frightened out of his wits and shedding his skin in some private place, the border ensign vocalised, although there wasn't anyone to hear. Shortly after the static started, the post was shut down and the data ceased to be recorded. He started running his hands over the surfaces within the post, searching for clues. However, as soon as he noticed his dead comrades, he had to leave, and he sat outside the building waiting for the replacement team. That arrived a little over an hour after the event. It was accompanied by 3 security guards under orders to escort him to headquarters back at the nearby Academy of Military Might. As he was led away chirping and clicking, his highly tuned Okina sensors gave him a sonic image of vessels departing from the enormous transit hub in the far distance. How he wished he was aboard one of them. One of the departing vessels, the Sci-fi United Republic Forces Hood, continued to ascend slowly over the kelp forest to the west of Jamesvarg. As the cruiser gained height in the pre-dawn dark, more and more of the green bacterial glow could be seen below. The movements of the vessel's tail to and fro pushed it forward towards the planet's surface. It banked effortlessly and continued to rise on its departure vector. Inside the craft, the crew that needed to tend to the passengers were dressing in their self-contained above-water respiration suits. These were known as scars. The scars consisted of an extremely tough, body-tight suit designed to keep a layer of water over the wearer. There were watertight sphincters in the finger and toe areas to allow claw extensions outside the suit if required. A clear helmet with an input and output tube to a small backpack containing filters and an aeration unit kept the Aquinas alive above water. Visitors to the watery world aboard the Surf Hood looked forward to removing their respiration devices and breathing in a gaseous atmosphere. The Hood broke the surface at a 45-degree angle and continued into the sky. All the fluid aboard filling the passenger areas had been removed minutes before. The air-breathing dignitaries aboard took their last breath out of a respirator since leaving their accommodations 6 hours ago in the Aquinas capital city, Cool. Emptying the hood's passenger areas was just a courtesy act towards the gas breathers. The crew would only need their scars when attending to the passengers. The passengers were a very select few invited by the Aquinas government to learn more about the water world. The pilot's voice was heard and continued to give information as the surf hood accelerated away towards the distant stars. Most of the Aquinas aboard looked down at the dwindling green glow of the dark side of Arison with a keen desire to return as soon as possible. One Aquinas aboard looked down on the largely green planet with an entirely different agenda in mind, and then settled in for the month-long flight. The surf hood was very old and consisted of technology from the earliest times of Arison's technical age. Its design was a blend of metals and biomatter. It was eons old even before it was selected to be the only interaction with Arison's closest neighbouring planet, 12 light years away, Deutra. The dwellers of Arison, the Peps and Aquinas, had known about Deutra centuries before Deutra had discovered Arison orbiting a distant star in the night sky. The Pep government outwardly had no wish to interact with aliens, and in this matter the Aquinas had taken the lead. But only after the first manned spacecraft from Deutra had achieved orbit around Arison. The Peps had wanted to blow it out of the sky, but the Aquinas had acted swiftly and returned the alien spacecraft to its point of departure within the hold of an Aquinas government craft. The Peps had at first wanted to attack and destroy Deutra, but after many months of heated discussions between the Pep president and the Aquinas prime minister, had decided to allow Deutra's continued existence. That was many centuries in the past, and since then the Aquinas had made numerous flights at light speeds to and from Deutra. At first these flights were decades between and purely observational. The Pep delegation was still very much against these visits, but as always the Aquinas government had the final word. The Peps were told to stay in sight of the planet and to leave affairs off-planet to the Aquinas. As time went by and tensions faded within the Peps, the flights between the two planets increased to an annual visit. Most of these visits were with an empty passenger hold. This current flight, however, had many delegates from planets within the Reland system returning to Deutra after the Aquinas organised conference. The journey between Arison and Deutra aboard the hood took only a month. The 12 light years travelled, however, was only slightly shorter distance than the home trip from Deutra to the Reland system for the passengers. The last part of their journey home in their own transports was a lot slower than the speeds the hood could achieve. It would take the dignitaries 18 months from Deutra Central to reach their homes. The Aquinas had managed to achieve light speeds more than 12 times faster than any other species in the galaxy and could get from Deutra to Reland in 6 weeks. These figures were not told to the guests, and the Aquinas were not going to Reland. They were only taking the guests as far as Deutra Central. The home trip for the visitors was their responsibility. The visitors were promised assistance to help them maximise their own planet's technology towards faster travel. The Aquinas indicated that some of them could expect as much as a 50% increase in top speed. This was a good enough draw card for the dignitaries to take the 60 light year round trip to the hidden planet somewhere past Deutra on the edge of the galaxy. In their spacecraft it would take the fastest of them a full year past Deutra to arrive at Arison if they knew where the hidden planet was. The Aquinas government were not inclined to let anyone know the whereabouts of Arison, so they used the surf hood to ferry the dignitaries to and from Arison at 156 times the speed of light. Unknown to the dignitaries or anyone else aboard the hood, a crew member had been abducted on his way to report in by Pep agents. Marion's superiors had matched his genetic code and appearance to the crew member perfectly. He'd been told by his superiors that he would be accepted as a crew member and had been instructed in his duties of systems technician, a redundant position on the surf hood as the vessel took care of itself. He had no problems and met no other crew members on his way to his station. It was a solitary area towards the rear of the midsection. From there, he monitored minor systems to ensure they functioned correctly. As such, there was very little for Marion to do but wait till he arrived at Deutsche Central. There he would jump ship and his contact would get him to Reland. He had no idea what he was supposed to do once he got to Reland. His superior had told him he would receive that information when he arrived at the gas giant. During departure, and for 8 hours into the flight, Marion acted as the Hood's systems tech. This kept him occupied familiarising himself with the systems. Once satisfied they would be fine without him for a while, he decided he was hungry and headed for the crew's eatery. He was feeling great. He'd never been inside an Aquinas creature before, and the feelings the creature was emitting was one of complete and utter peace. Marion was surprised. His disguise was supposed to be visual only. He was supposed to look like an Aquinas, that's all. But he couldn't help but absorb these feelings, and his new Aquinas genes and awareness thrived within him. He found himself tapping his claws together as happy Aquinas sometimes do. As he neared the eatery, the round, muscular passageways got busier with other crew, and they smiled and clicked happily in greeting as they passed. This was all new to Marion. Pep crews were much more serious, Marion scowled in thought. He much preferred the biosphere he was feeling here on the Sopio United Republic Forces Hood. He turned the last corner of the corridor, and the roundness lined with red and blue pulsating tissue led into a larger domed area. There were many bulbous masses about that Aquinas crew were gathered around, chirping, clicking, and whistling merrily as they ate and talked to crew members. On the left of the entrance to the wall was lined with many sphincters, teats, and orifices. Marion recognised these as they were the same in Pep creatures. This was a dispensary for your meals. Marion was a little apprehensive, as Pep and Aquinas eating tastes could be quite different. He reasoned if he stuck to crustaceans and salad, he should be fine, and this he ordered when he fronted the dispensary. Hood greeted him politely and thanked him when he left. Marion smiled. You got no such courtesy from a Pep dispensary. Unfortunately, Hood's amiable manner distracted him from the meal he was given, and he didn't notice the strange collection of baby crabs and shrimps that wriggled in the small netted bag he was given. When he looked, none of them were familiar to him, and his good feelings faded. He was hungry, and particularly fond of Pep cuisine. He wasn't fond of trying new tastes, and some Aquinas food he found particularly disgusting. Several globular masses were unoccupied, and he made for one of these. He didn't notice the offers by other crew members for him to join them at their clusters that were not full. He suddenly felt lonely. He rocked his head from side to side. Was he kidding? Lonely? He needed to snap out of his Aquinas mood, he grumbled. He took an angry bite of the net, 3 little crabs and a shrimp. His eyes widened. These were delicious! He'd never tasted anything so good, and instantly the good Aquinas feelings came flooding back. He turned and saw a crewmate looking at him. She was smiling. He smiled back, and instantly she beckoned for him to join her and the other 2 Aquinas who were dining at the next cluster. He took a deep breath in. He couldn't hide, even if he was supposed to be undercover. The best way to be undercover was to play the part to the finest. The crew member he replaced would have undoubtedly joined in, so he did. He introduced himself as Trebor, as this was his cover. They welcomed him aboard and asked him where his last posting had been. He fed them his cover story, and they accepted it without question. They were all very friendly, and immediately he felt at ease. After the meal he excused himself, saying he was tired, as the last posting was in a different time zone, and he still hadn't caught up. This part was at least true. They parted company, laughing and promising to catch up during the next off-duty period. Marion hadn't felt this good for as long as he could remember. This was a holiday compared to working in a Pep creature. His private area was on the opposite side of the narrowing passageway to his duty station, and curiosity got the better of him, so he checked in to see the minor systems were okay. That night, Marion's dreams started nice and fluffy like an Aquinas, but soon he found himself back in the bar in Jamesburg. He had forgotten about the bar. Perhaps the shock had pushed it from his mind, but it came flooding back, and he woke from his slumber screaming. He sat up, vomited his dinner. Several small medics appeared and darted about, clearing away his stomach contents. Another medic swam up behind his neck and gently started kissing it. He felt the warmth enter his body from that point and felt better, but still he couldn't stop weeping. How could he have killed those Peps? He didn't remorse the Aquinas border guards. He was rocking his head from side to side, chirping quietly, "No, no, no." For a week he dreamt every night. It always started with him being the Okina system tech called Trebor. It always started with him having a good time with the new crewmates he had met at his first meal. His first meal was always part of the beginning of his dream, and he always enjoyed that. The Okina's nature being in the foreground with him, helping everyone and being ultra friendly like Okinos were. But eventually the dream always became a nightmare. Sometimes he was blasting peps with a border cannon, grinning insanely. Sometimes it was the two he murdered in Frigid Square before the crowd had arrived, and the two when the crowd did pour in from the side avenue. And always the last murder of his dream before he awoke in a panic was the first. During his waking hours, his tasks aboard the hood took him 5 or 10 minutes every 8 or so hours. He spent a good deal of the time in the eatery trying the different Okinos meals on offer. Some were quite palatable, and he was surprised to find there was a wide range of enjoyable treats. There was plenty of icky stuff as well, and once or twice he had to spit the food out, unable to swallow. He was even violently ill one night after a particularly spicy meal. All the crew at some time or other visited the recreation room, and Marion became familiar with them all. Each one he met he felt was a long-lost friend, and he conversed easily with them. After a week, something happened. The female who first beckoned for him to join them at the eatery invited him to the recreation room for a game of stars. At first the conversation was about their day on the hood. Marion had learnt her name was Ferrer, and she had much more to say than he. She was one of the hood's flight attendants. Marion could have guessed she was, as they always picked the prettiest females for that. Ferrer found the dignitaries hilarious, and even succeeded in making Marion laugh when she started impersonating her favourites. The only drawback Ferrer complained of was the smell of the aliens they were ferrying. The way she flared her nostrils when she was explaining the stench made them both laugh. They also talked about serious matters, and Ferrer explained her partner had been killed 30 years ago in an industrial accident, and Marion was the first Okina she had seen in all that time to trigger her hormones. Marion didn't mention his pet breeding partner. He was undercover. The pheromone link between his pet partner and he did not exert the emotions that an Okina's matching did. They talked for hours, and when they said goodnight, Ferrer gently kissed the back of Marion's neck. His sides started glowing golden, and Ferrer giggled little girly cheeps. Marion's dreams were filled with Ferrer that night, and for the first time since the border post, did not turn into a nightmare. These feelings were strange to Marion. The bond between pet females and males is practically non-existent. They do partner for life, however they only see their partner when it is breeding time, once every 5 years, when the urge that only their chosen one can satisfy is satisfied. Okina's coupling is also for life, but that is where the similarities end, and is a whole different matter. Needless to say, Marion was enveloped in love, firstly from the Okina's creature named Hood, and secondly from an Okina's female named Ferrer. For 3 weeks, Marion's life was a dream. Then, one night, spaceflight was interrupted by the strangest sensation Marion had ever experienced. He was awakened from his sleep, but could not move. His mind convinced him he needed to freeze to the spot. He could feel Ferrer beside him awake, and also unable to move. Above them, they could see a gaseous atmosphere filling the quarters. The shimmering lines sank slowly down the walls. Just before the gas level reached them, they felt the hood drop into sublight speed. Then the sound of distant explosions. Then the sensation passed, and they were released from the mental seizure. Marion grabbed his utility belt and ensured his blasters were fully charged. Ferrer kissed him gently on the back of the neck. They donned their scars so they could breathe in the gaseous volume of air, and left his crew quarters. Almost immediately, security guards passed them hurriedly in the passageways, chirping to each other to intercept the pirates. Pirates? Marion couldn't believe what he just heard. Pirates? How the heck could an Okina's creature be boarded by pirates? Ferrer and he looked at each other in disbelief, and then in unison nodded and broke into a run. They turned in opposite directions at the next junction and parted company with just a single whistle each. Ferrer heading to assist the dignitaries, and Marion to his choice, the restricted areas. Then it struck him. He was going to meet pirates for the first time, sooner than he had expected. He was angry. How did they get on the hood? Marion knew about pirates. Pirates would be carrying life detectors, and they never left survivors. Not that he was afraid. He could easily deal with pirates. He just didn't want to be detected. He would pick that time. He also knew that the air conditioning ducts on this older class of vessels were extremely over-insulated to ensure maximum efficiency of the climate control systems. He found the room he needed and entered the smallest duct he could. The duct closed behind him and he set about his work. The hood could sense his motive and allowed the systems technician into areas restricted to maintenance teams. It was a tight fit, but Marion slowly made his way through Hood's innards to the rear sections, past and behind the intruders. Security would meet the pirates head-on. He was going to ensure they couldn't go back. He and the Akina security team would have them between them. Swag had been told by his employer he would need something special in order to take on this graft. He laughed arrogantly. He'd never heard of Harrison or the Akinas. But as he was no fool, he took the large case offered and planned to do exactly what he was told to do with it. He could only open a small outer sleeve on the case at first, and it simply gave him a set of coordinates and instructions to be there at a particular time. He left on the mission months before he would get to the required location, where an asteroid was due to pass, and he was told to hitch a ride on that. He would have to ride the cold, hard lump of rock for 3 weeks until it arrived where he was supposed to be. When he had attached his yacht to the asteroid, the case he had been given mysteriously opened. Within was a large metallic sphere. Instructions were given that this should be placed in the countermeasures room and left alone. This they did. When they checked in on it later, they were surprised to see a cable had sprouted from it and had connected itself to the yacht's countermeasures. Swag rushed back to his command station and noticed his stealth capabilities were now 10 times better than they had been previously. There were many other strange-looking devices, including a stone tablet about 3 handspans across and 2 deep. This was covered on one flat surface by many tubule jelly structures. They were instructed to place the stone tablet in water so as to cover the many tubules. The tubule started swaying in the water and a blue fan of light appeared, and on the outer edge a small green luminous dot blinked gently. They could only guess at its purpose. It became apparent after several days that the small green dot was traversing across the blue fan. A week later it started a low beep that over an hour grew to a high-pitched whine. The green dot approached the centre and there was a blinding flash of yellow light from the stone, and the noise abruptly stopped. The asteroid his ship was attached to slowly tumbled along its orbit. He had landed on exactly the coordinates and orientation the mission instruction had stated, and as the asteroid rolled over to expose his weapons outputs towards the star that Deutsche revolved around, he squeezed the trigger twice, and the creature dropped out of light speed in front of them. He had never carried out this maneuver before. He liked its sneakiness. He did realise that it was not his doing. Whoever had set this up had resources way above Swag's pay grade. He was just carrying out the mission laid down in the case given to him. He hadn't even known what the mission was until after they had landed on the asteroid. He ordered his tactical officer to load the second largest missile in his armoury into the weapons tube. A tiny dart provided within the mission case was loaded into another. His missile was big enough to vaporise a battleship. The hypodermic dart was tiny enough to pass through the anchor eye of such a battleship. He would rather destroy the creature from outside with his thermonuclear warheads, but the instruction setter told him this would be impossible and he would need to carry out his objective from within. Nonetheless, he was not too keen on entering into a beast, so he'd try his way too. He didn't need his tactical officer to tell him his ammunition was wasted. He watched in the magnified forward view screen as his missile harmlessly bounced off the Surf Hood's mottled skin. He raised a single eyebrow. The Surf Hood did not detect the craft on its sensors. It should have, but the pirate's yacht had assistance with its countermeasures. The Surf Hood did detect the impact of the dart, and its systems started to go to sleep. Not so fast as to allow the initial explosive charge sent from its attacker to penetrate its skin, but the asteroid and the surrounding stars faded from the Hood's sensors, and the Hood's ability to lock its weaponry on targets failed as the effects of the poison from the syringe took hold. The crew aboard the Surf Hood could feel the effects of the dart on their creature. The floor beneath their feet felt sick. The vibrant blues and reds in the muscular walls were dulling. In response, the Hood was trying desperately to expel all the air she had created for her passengers. They were already adorning their respirators. The defensive shell around the Aquinas creature slowly failed, and the commander of the small attacking yacht fired his missiles again, as was laid out in his memorized mission plan. Seconds later, Hood's tail section was impacted by more projectiles from the attackers. The small yacht had firepower way beyond what should have been possible for a vessel of its size, but could still not inflict damage to the Hood's outer skin. The Hood's captain barked orders to carry out evasive action just as the last of the propulsion systems was rendered inoperative. The attacking yacht's targeting had locked onto the Hood from its hiding place, and now its pilot, Sal, launched Seaberg into space and flew straight at its victim. Less than 15 seconds had passed, and the small yacht was firmly attached to the Arison vessel's hull. The Hood twitched as it was for the second time injected with another toxic agent. This toxin was localized and allowed, by the time the first security team had reached the rear, the pirates to cut their way in. Fluid was knee-deep in the passageways as the pirates dropped through their entry point, but as the effects of the tranquilizers took hold, the fluid ceased to rush in and slowed to a weep. Captain Swag and his cutthroats waded in a viscous steaming fluid as the Aquina security team entered the passageway. The messages within the mission instructions had stated the normal pirate welcoming would be wasted on this target and offered some fist-sized walnuts to throw instead. Armed with weaponry completely alien to them, Swag and his crew met the inhabitants of Arison for the first time. Swag threw one of the walnuts his employers had supplied, and it exploded with a loud bang, and instantly the security team was dulled and weakened. Moments later, they fell, and the pirates, with ears ringing, stepped through the pile of dead Aquinas and headed forward to the bridge. The information Swag's employee had provided was proving useful. Without it, when the creature had first dropped into sub-light speed in front of the pirate ship, the sight of the surf Hood would have completely taken him and his crew by surprise, and they may have balked and allowed the Hood to escape. The surf Hood had no idea why it had suddenly felt compelled to drop out of light speed. The command had flashed across its brain, and it had obeyed. It could offer no explanation to its frantic commander and the bridge crew, who were frozen to the spot at the same instant. The Hood was old. Its home planet of Arison had circled its sun more than 1 million times since its creation. Not only was it the strangest vessel Swag had ever seen, it was also the oldest. Its outer shell was not metallic, but living tissue that seemed to sag on an underlying skeletal structure. It had dozens of long muscular tentacles trailing from its underbody, and many of those extended past its tail. The skin was a mottled grey, which continued down the tentacles for half their length. The ends of the tentacles shifted from the mottled grey of its body to stark white. The skin was not smooth, but covered by many bulbous protrusions. It had stabilized wings at its mid-length, and smaller ones lower down, closer to the rear of the craft. Swag had studied the information provided with the mission case continuously while they were ferried through the cosmos by the asteroid, his photographic memory recalling the Hood's interior details with ease. Even though he was expecting it, though, the sight of the craft and now the fluid that was oozing from the walls and the floors really put him and his crews at unease. More security teams rushed aft, and unfortunately for them, they came across the pirates much sooner than expected. Without the aid of his employer, Swag could now see that he would not have had a chance in overpowering these Aquinas. Another walnut grenade was released, and the surprised security team dropped to its knees, gagging to death. Dead and dying bodies now littered the hallway. Swag administered his brand of first aid to those that required it, a blaster shot to the head. This act amazed him. His shots were not penetrating the Aquinas. The victims were dying from the effects of his employer's grenades, and not by his cruel hand. The pirate believed in no prisoners, and above all, no survivors. Although dismayed that his weapons were not affecting his victims, he was happy they were dying. Luckily, he had assistance with this raid, or his beliefs would have done him no good whatsoever. Swag's yacht, as planned, passed by outside as the ruthless leader approached the first of the passenger areas. A number of passengers had obtained their weapons and had set about planning defences for themselves. 2 minutes later, Swag, injected the contents of a syringe into the wall next to the passenger lounge portal. He counted to 10, then set his directional explosives. The lower passenger area exploded, killing half the passengers there. Moments later, the pirates swarmed in and killed the rest. One of Swag's crew discovered that shooting the Akinos Scar's backpack resulted in a blaster bolt ricocheting around the room, which hit the same crew member in the leg.
"Hey, Pete,"
muttered Swag,
"don't worry, laddie. We'll take good care of you,"
as he drew his cutlass and removed his wounded companion's head. He had no time for the wounded, friend or foe. In fact, in his yacht, Seabird, he had removed the medical facilities. Seabird was completely void of any form of medical equipment, save a cutlass or blaster. With all the passengers in the lower area taken care of, the roof was injected with poison, packed with explosives, and detonated. That took care of the passengers in the upper level. "No, life reading's off," shouted the first mate in dismay. His sensor was reading the hood as alive, so his statement to the captain was not entirely true. Swag sensed a doubt in his first mate's statement and shot him a glance. The first mate just stared at Swag and shrugged.
"Proceed forward,"
was the captain's reply. When they reached the last of the areas cleared for passenger use, there was a great rush of fluid from the forced open access port that washed the lead pirates way back down the passageway they had come. By the time they got to the bridge, the fluid was chest high. The portals to the command module were heavier duty than what the pirates had encountered thus far. However, Swag had taken that into account when planning this raid and had bought the appropriate sized cannon to force his way into the bridge. He used the last of the syringes provided to inject a dark green murky poison into the bridge's closed opening. He knew Seabird was docking just above them as planned, and at the same time the fury from the cannon was released and the entrance to the bridge, with the aid of the supplied poison, was blown apart. Instantly there was another massive flow of water as the levels on each side equalized, and then energy bolts pierced the entrance and 2 more pirates died. Well, actually only one was killed by enemy fire. Dan was only winged. Swag threw the last grenade through the destroyed entrance into the bridge. A small pop was heard as it exploded, spraying the bridge with its chemical contents and neutralizing all Akinos defense systems. And as Swag signaled for the remaining scallywags to storm the bridge, he leaned over Dan and stabbed his wounded compatriot with his cutlass.
"Never."
He waded casually onto the bridge to find the 7 Akinos piloting the hood floating dead in the chest-deep fluid that continued to flow steadily back to the non-restricted areas.
"All right, get to work,"
Swag yelled at his crew. 3 hours later, anything and everything of value was stripped from its holds. His booty was the luggage of the travelling dignitaries, and nothing of value could be recognised from the hood. There was nothing in the command module that looked anything like Swag could have considered a control. The whole place looked like a muscular coral bed. He shivered. They departed the dying hood with great relief. They felt as if they had entered into a beast, and they were relieved to be leaving the internals of the Akinos creature. Seabird, with Captain Swag at the helm, vanished in a white blink as it disappeared into light speed. Seconds before that, as Marion emerged from his hiding place, the Sci-fi United Republic Forces hood erupted in a violent pulsating ball of flame. Captain Swag laughed heartily. He really loved his work. Seabird generally required her captain and 7 to crew her. 3 crew could manage the metallic mass if required. However, Swag had made some special modifications to the computer's interface, and if required, he could run the yacht alone. But for a pleasure cruise, the captain liked to have a first mate and 6 crew. However, even with all the modifications, Swag was deep in thought about how Seabird would cope without the 3 crew recently killed aboard the hood. Swag pondered over who was going to be the next first mate, now that Den was gone. He didn't think too long about it though, because he could and would manage that task easily himself. It was only a matter of time anyway. Dan had always been number 1 on Swag's list of crew to go. Dan had been with Swag from the beginning and knew way too much. The navigation task was a function of helm anyway as far as Swag was concerned, so the now dead Pete will not be missed and will not be replaced, ever. Swag knew he could perform all the duties of the recently deceased first mate and navigation officer.
Seaberg managed fine with just 5. Swag would make sure of that. And as for the third fatality of the raid, Mao, well, Swag had no idea how he'd put up with Mao for so long. Good mechanics were a sought-after commodity for space travel, and good ones were everywhere. How in blazes had Swag ended up with Mao? Mao was lucky to be shot by the Okinos. It was better than what Swag had planned. Swag had imagined skinning Mao and hanging him by hooks for the tendons on what Swag guessed were ankles. Swag had no idea what species Mao was, just plain weird, that's all he could think. Swag was not in the least bit prejudiced about Mao's appearance, but the truth was Mao was not really much of a technician. The only reason Swag would miss Mao was because he wasn't going to have the pleasure of killing him himself.
So 5 left.
Swag pondered to himself.
No problems there. In fact,
he continued to calculate in his mind the value he had accumulated and how it could be divided amongst the 5, or 4, or 3. As he pondered these things, the communications officer felt a sharp and extreme pain in his neck before expiring silently. Number 4 on Swag's hit list was taken care of. The pilot Sal had not been part of the raid, but had to manoeuvre Seabird, dropping the boarding party at the rear of the vessel and picking them up at the front. He'd only been docked for 15 minutes at the drop-off point. He waited longer than ordered. There was plenty of time, and he could relax while still jockeying a ride from their victim. The hatches had been sealed right after the last of the raiding party had left. Seaberg and Swag would never find out. Sal was alone on Seaberg, and so long as Swag saw him pass overhead on target, there would not be a problem. That was 2 hours ago. Sal was not alone now, and there was a problem. He sensed someone close. He pulled his head up from out of his locker, just in time to see a hurtling elbow microseconds away from his temple, and then he fell dead as the poison blow took effect. Number 3 on the list was gone. Swag's pondering continued.
I could retire, just me. But how long before I become bored? I could do it alone. Good people are hard to find, especially if I keep misplacing crew. Rumors always start, no matter how convincing some of my accidents look. And besides, it takes time to train them.
He continued pacing the ship.
Place feels pretty empty.
He smiled to himself. Fran was in the shower, removing the filth of her recent activity. She hated Swag's pure cruelty and had no illusions to how fragile life was for his crew. She had imagined in her mind the 100 of different ways she was going to rid the universe of that pig. Fran was a combat pilot, but after months of unemployment had reluctantly accepted a position aboard Seaberg operating the tactical systems. She realised she was being hypocritical, but killing from a distance seemed so much cleaner than what she was doing now. Shooting a missile at a distant target shielded her from the reality of killing living beings. Close quarters killing was smelly, viscous work, and she hated it. Too bad for Fran, because it was about to happen again. Luckily for Fran, this time it was quick, and she didn't even see it coming. Only Swag and one other left. Joss was the yacht's defence specialist. Too bad he didn't know much about self-defence. He was, however, a systems expert and had saved Seaberg on countless occasions with rapid deployment of countermeasures, complex evasive flight paths, but most of all, his species have a sixth sense about danger and react to situations astonishingly fast. So fast, in fact, that Josh turned to land a powerful punch before his aggressor was near to reaching out and encapsulating his neck as planned. So much for silence anyway, the attacker thought, as he drew his weapon and killed Seaberg's defence officer. Only the captain left.